Well, prophets are rarely honored in their own home. They are so commonplace, we see them every day. And such is the case with Todd Johnson. Dr. Todd Johnson is the perhaps major, maybe the major demographer of global Christianity in the world today. We're just delighted to call him our own. Dr. Todd Johnson is the director of the Center of the Study of Global Christianity. Come speak for us, Todd.
Okay, great. So we've had a terrific biblical foundation and some reflections on what immigration is all about for us today. And what I want to do is add a layer to it, and that is to talk about faith on the move, and religion, migration, and the gospel, and what it all might mean for us. And maybe I'll offer a little advice towards the end. First of all, this is based on two different reports. One was put out by the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life, which was on migrants, and another, as you can see clearly, was a paper that was written by our office. My graduate student Gina and I wrote this paper and presented it in Toronto last year, where I met with Danny Carroll, by the way. We had a wonderful time together there. There's actually two things going on here. One of these is studying migrants, and the other is studying diasporas. Migrants are people who are in a country other than the one in which they were born. All right? But when migrants settle in another country and they have children, those children were not born in another country, but they build up the diaspora. And you can have migrants settle somewhere and then get bigger and bigger and bigger over time. And one great example that you probably all have people you know is the Armenian American people in the United States. And there's, according to Pew, this is the Pew report, there's 85,000, which would be recent migrants from Armenia or maybe somewhere else even, who are now in the United States. But in our diaspora study, there's 1 million, you see, because they've been here a long time. They came unfortunately, at the end of the 19th century with the genocide, a lot of people came, and then they came in the 1940s again. And of course, they've all been born here. But they're part of what we would call, or what they would call, the Armenian diaspora. They're outside of their original homeland. So that's a distinction between these two. Now, I'm going to use the Pew Forum's graphics, because they're so much better than mine, to kind of give you a little briefing on what this all means. But let's just say what it's all about is people on the move, okay? And when people move, they bring their religion with them. And what we have is we find religion showing up in the most unexpected places because of the movement of people. I mean, it's pretty elementary, but it's actually very important. And for people like us, my office and Brian Grimm, who wrote the other report, we're very interested in how people are moving and spreading religion all over the world. Okay, so that's kind of what we're going to look at. Of course, this is not theoretical either. Last week in Lampedusa, off of the coast of Italy, a ship sank. A lot of people died. They haven't even found all the bodies yet. And the important thing is that the people who were coming were largely Christians and Muslims and maybe a few other religions from Africa. And that was who died trying to get into Europe, are religious migrants in one sense. Some were fleeing persecution as well. So many of our brothers and sisters died off the coast of Italy last week. You have to realize it's a tough thing. Another side of this, I don't know if you can read that. Interesting, the gap between rich and poor is not as great as we thought. Okay, so anyway, one of the issues behind this is inequality, which is increasing around the world. It's increasing within countries as well. Like this country is less equal than it was 20, 30 years ago. Should be of great concern to Christians. Let's hope so, especially after Danny prodded us a little bit that this might go all the way back into the Old Testament and make more sense for us. Okay, so let's talk about the Pew Forum report just to start here. One of their main findings is this, that about 214 million people are living outside of their home of birth in 2010, about 3% of the world's population. That's a lot of people, and it's grown obviously in number over the years. I might say that 100 years ago, I think about 12 or 13% of the world's population was living outside of its homeland. So this is not the greatest migration in history, but it is a lot of people, and it is increasing, so it needs our attention. What's interesting from a religion point of view is the fact that half of these migrants are Christians, okay? And now you have to put this in context. About a third of the world's population is Christian, but half of the migrants are Christians. So this is something that is a phenomenon within our global Christian community. That's one aspect of it. Muslims also are disproportionately large. About 27% in this study are on the move, and they're closer to 23, 24% of the world's population. So that means they're disproportionately. And between us, we make up, you can see from this graph, we make up about 3/4 of the world's migrants, but only 55% of the world's population. So we'll get to that. That's something about that. Of course, Jews are the most widely dispersed of any people, and this is not diaspora, this is people currently on the move, and a lot of them are from Russia and Ukraine, you might remember, in more recent years. The Jewish diaspora is even more significant, of course, since the majority of Jews live outside of Israel, okay, today. Okay, so where are these people from? Here's a nice little map showing the origin. The main origin of Christian migrants is Mexico, more than 12 million. Others include Russia. Russian Christians have been on the move, Ukrainian. The largest share of Muslim migrants are Palestinians in origin, and then Pakistan, Bangladesh, India. The major source of Jewish migrants is Russia, as I said, and Ukraine. The top country of origin, this is where they're coming from, Buddhist is Vietnam, followed by China. Hindus, of course, have overwhelmingly come from India. By the way, if you just type Faith on the Move Pew Forum, you can download this entire report free of charge. Okay, so just in case you want to look at these later, they're available for you. They also did one of these representative maps. Migrants come from everywhere, of course, but the largest single share, about a third, come from the Asia-Pacific region. Second largest group come from Europe, but that's largely people moving from one European country to another, because all you have to do is move to another country. If we all got up and moved to Canada, we're migrants, okay? You don't have to move very far, necessarily. Then Latin America and Caribbean are the next highest source of migrants. Then where do migrants go? Okay, with its huge population of immigrants, the U.S. is the #1 destination for Christian migrants, and that's largely from Mexico and Central America, South America even, and they make up 3/4 of all foreign-born people in the United States. So this is quite a movement of people. We're also the top, here, let me show you. Oh yeah, we're the top, oh, I'm missing this thing. Okay, there we go. So #1 for Christians, #1 for Buddhists, for the unaffiliated who are mainly from China, #2 destination for Hindus, #2 for Jews, and #7 for Muslims, behind Saudi Arabia, Russia, Germany, France, Jordan, Pakistan. These are countries that receive more Muslims. And the map showing the destination of migrants is different than the one showing where they came from. So here you see a disproportionate North America because of the receiving, and Europe also is disproportionate, even Australia, and then the Arab states of the Persian Gulf receive lots of people who actually work there temporarily, but long enough to get into the UN study. You just, or the Pew study. You have to just stay a year in order to get in to be a migrant. So if you want to go to Canada for a year just to be a migrant, you can do that. You're welcome to do that. Okay, so let's get to diasporas then. Diasporas are the settled migrants, even from a long time ago. This is a diasporan community in Washington, D.C. you may not have heard of. They are Zoroastrians. And they're originally from India and Iran, because there was a migration of Zoroastrians a long time, I think the 9th, 10th century, from Persia down into India. They're called Parsis there, and they've migrated to the United States actually a long time ago, and there's a pretty significant Zoroastrian presence here in the United States. And again, not all of them came recently, so they might not be on Pew's study, but they're on our radar as we try to understand who they are. So our findings are a little different. It's actually a lot more. So we're saying 12.5% of the world's population, upwards towards 900 million, are settled somewhere else, okay, in a diaspora. We think it's actually much higher than this, but this is as far as we could get with the clumsy tools that we have to try to measure these kinds of things. And these are the two of the largest diasporas here, which is the Chinese diaspora and the Indian diaspora. And you can see from this that a lot of both of these communities live outside of their homeland. Again, possibly for many, many decades. It doesn't have to be recent. So we come, and here's why I didn't show you our graphics. They don't look quite as nice as Pew. But actually the results are similar, and that is that Christians and Muslims are disproportionately represented in diaspora, which means, well, here, how about making a nice little straightforward thing? 55% of the world's population, 73% of all people in diaspora are Christian or Muslim. And so it's very similar to the Pew study. In fact, Pew's showing that it's actually going to be increasing because the proportions are even higher, and that'll drive the diaspora proportions up over time. Okay? So these are kind of the basic facts. And just to throw this in, Christians and Muslims together were only a third of the world's population in 1800. They've been growing. They'll be 57% probably in 2020, and that's a 66% there in 2100. And if you think about it, what that means is in 1800, these two religions were a third of the world's population. In 2100, they'll be 2/3 of the world's population. I want to highlight that a little later. That's quite important. If you were there last night, you know that this is not all happy news, this movement of people. And actually, something we haven't mentioned is another very large category, and that is people on the move within their own country. We heard last night, for those of you that were there, that Iraqi Christians in Dora and in some other places in Iraq, in one place there were 2,000 of them that had to move just suddenly. They all left. They left their cars, their houses, and moved up into the northern part of Iraq where it was safer. This is internal displacement, and this is a far larger number than those that cross borders. So this is also a problem that we need to look at. These are actually Iraqi Christians in Sweden. And this was part of a news story in which 26 people who came for refuge in Sweden were denied and deported back to Iraq, where a couple were even killed later on, and then some reapplied and came back later. So very complicated. I hope you were paying attention on immigration policy, because that's critical. What does this all have to do with us? Well, with us, we're emphasizing mission, right, this week. What it's doing is increasing religious diversity almost everywhere. There are a few places that are becoming less diverse as they're kicking out other religions. Like Iraq is becoming less diverse. Turkmenistan, a place that's already largely Muslim, they're kicking out more and more people that aren't Muslims, and a place like that is actually becoming less diverse. But just about everywhere else, including here, is becoming more diverse. And if you look at 100 years ago and now, we are far more diverse. And it's an odd thing, I think, for a missions-minded Christian to think if it could only be like it was 100 years ago. Because 100 years ago, all the Christians lived in one place, all the Muslims in another, didn't know each other, very little contact. When missionaries went out from the Christian world 100 years ago into the Muslim world, they looked, and in the end, looked for a few Christians that they might convert from another background. That's how bad things were. So we're in much better shape now with this increasing diversity. It's a big opportunity. But we have some problems, so let me talk about these. So our biggest problem is we don't know each other. They don't know us, we don't know them. Our research has shown over 80% of all non-Christians have never even met a Christian. So there's still a cordoning off of religions and ethnicities, and that's a huge problem for an incarnational faith like ours. We have no business separating ourselves from other people. And so here's some issues, okay? The first being how we spilled a cup of coffee into a perfect thing of the world. But anyway, we have a few issues we have to deal with as we talk about this increased diversity. One is that we don't know much about other faiths. And this religious survey showed that actually atheists scored the highest on the test about what was in other religions. Jews next, Mormons next, finally white evangelical Protestants, and so on. Their 32 is the perfect score. And these are questions like, which religion does the Quran belong to? Okay, that's the type of question. So you can go online and see. I was so exercised by the results of this test, this is a few years ago, that I called my pastor and said, can I teach religion at Sunday school? He said, sure. And we used this book, God is Not One, from Stephen Prothero down at Boston University as a text. It was really, really very good. Okay, we don't know much about religion. We don't know much about geography. You know, kids in Miami can't find Florida on a map. You know, people in the United States couldn't find New Orleans on a map after Katrina. People in this country can't find Iraq on a map after invading it, and so on. So we got some real problems there. We don't know much about history either. I have that same issue. In fact, they've taken tests all over the United States. Kids don't score so well. But even more troubling is there's a group that scores worse than everybody else, and that's politicians. So something to be said there. We don't know much about the Bible. The most popular verse in the United States is God helps those who help themselves, which I think is Ben Franklin, not Paul, the Apostle Paul. The other thing is we have a very hostile approach to people in other religions. It might be based in some history in this ourselves. This is from the Crusades. And we've got a lot to overcome in that area. Too much hostility. So what should we do? Well, there's a few things I want to suggest. One is what Kyle was talking about, and that is to begin to address the fragmentation that we have within our own faith. And part of this is that, you know, you think of immigration bringing more Muslims to the United States, but it's actually bringing Nigerians and Brazilians and Filipinos and Serbians and people of all different backgrounds from Christian backgrounds are coming here. Remember, Christian migrants are a big part of it. So we are actually getting a bigger taste of the global family of Christ as we see immigrants move around. And so that's a particular challenge. One thing is to just get past the blind man and the elephant, you know, the famous parable about 5 blind men touching an elephant in different places and saying, this is what an elephant really is. Well, it's Christ, you know, for us. It's Christ, and it's one Christ. There's only one elephant, and that's what Christianity is about. It's really not all these individual pieces. We have something in common. Actually, privately last night, for you, those of you that were there, I heard a very moving story from Fadi, who had helped bring a Muslim to Christ, but the Muslim had first met Orthodox Christians in Iraq, and he said to Fadi, who was Catholic, said, now what do I do about all these differences within Christianity? He said, follow Christ. You know, I follow Christ, they follow Christ, follow Christ. And he became a Christian and was in the Orthodox community through the evangelism of a Catholic in Iraq. I mean, that's terrific. And that shows some real vision, I think, of where we are at. We need to reduce duplication and competition at the same time with rival churches facing each other. Well, maybe they're going to face each other, but maybe we can actually work together. And then let's get on to deepening our knowledge of world religions so that we really know who these people are, what they believe. And while we're working on that, let's remember that we have to strengthen theological understanding of why there are world religions. And especially for our young people, we don't want them drifting. We want to see what is the place of Christianity in the constellation of world religions. That's something that that's a project that you do not abandon while you are learning about other groups, because there's much confusion there. In the study of religion, I'd like to see us go much further than we are. Having lived in Thailand, there's different schools within Buddhism, and they believe very different things, much like Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox. And we need to study those schools. We shouldn't just know this is what Buddhists believe. That is actually not all that helpful. There's more depth there that's quite important as we think about these people as friends in particular. And there's some real small religions that are very important, like the Baha'i. This is their headquarters in Haifa in Israel. They're a very successful group around the world. There's only about 7 million, but they're in more countries than any religion except Christianity. And it's only a couple countries that they don't have, and one is the Vatican. So that's why we've got a little bit more going there. And then finally, or not finally, but next to finally, or next to finally, we need to empower Christians to interact in these diverse communities. And I was thinking, I was in Manila a few weeks ago, and I was talking about this, and it just occurred to me that we really ought to listen to the people who are growing up, the Christians who are growing up in these communities. Now, we have a bit of diversity in the United States, but we still have post-Christendom trauma that we deal with all the time, thinking that everybody should be a Christian and nothing else. So why not let the people in Singapore write the books on interreligious dialogue and how we get along, because they've grown up in it all of their lives. And so I think that's something to think about, is there's people who have a lot more to say about this, and yet most of the books are written here where there's still some confusion about what this is all about. And I'd like to make an appeal that we also really give some attention to Christian-Muslim relations, because these are two religions that are now growing up to 2/3 of the world's population. This is one of the most critical relations we have related to faith on the move. Both of our faiths are on the move more than they should be, perhaps, and that's going to put us in increasing contact. There's a lot of reasons why that's going to happen. So let's give special attention to improving Christian-Muslim relations. And then finally, let's learn civility. And that's not something you learn when everybody is just like you. You start to learn this when there's a lot of difference. And personally, I've had just a terrific opportunity here in Boston to work with the Jewish and Muslim community, meeting regular basis. We're sponsoring meetings on what can we do about Baha'is in Iran and Christians in Egypt and Jews who are persecuted in other places. So we've gotten together, we found some common ground, and we're actually going to continue to sponsor meetings together. And I found myself, I'll just close with this, I found myself a couple of months ago being invited to a Jewish fundraiser down at a nice hotel in Boston, and they asked me if I could say a few words about working as a Christian, working with Jews. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting. So I go down there. There's, as far as you can see, the most august group of Jews, every important person in Boston in construction and politics. And I sat across from the president of Hebrew College and next to the Greek ambassador, and I got up and in fear and trembling, and I said just what a wonderful thing it was to work, especially with the head of the American Jewish Committee, and how this was so important for our communities to talk to each other and work together. And that was a highlight for me of this last year, was to be there, maybe out of all the people, 2 Gentiles, me. So I really enjoyed that. And I think there's a world of opportunities like this for us out there. And I just want to encourage you, having gone on this Faith on the Move trip this week and looked at immigration, that we we set ourselves up to really do something positive about this. I think this is where we're headed in the 21st century. Thank you.